Chapter 1. Two Worlds, the Sea and the Family That Never Saw Me. People think the ocean is the hardest place to survive, but they have never stood in the middle of their own family pretending not to see them. My name is Marina Quinn, 34 years old, a Coast Guard captain who has spent half her life pulling strangers out of storms that should have killed them. Yet somehow I never learned how to save myself from the quiet ways my family erased me. I thought the worst thing I would face this year would be a wall of ice closing in on us in the dark, but it turned out the real danger waited at home, behind warm lights and polite voices that cracked the moment a Navy SEAL saluted me and exposed the truth they never wanted the world to know. I survived the lake that night, and I pulled 27 people out of a storm no one expected us to beat. But I never imagined the real storm would begin when I finally stood in my own name. The last echo of the helicopter blades stayed inside my skull long after the rotors slowed. Even standing on the pier, I could still feel Lake Michigan pushing under my boots, the black water rolling, the ice cracking against the hull in hard, hollow knocks. 27 survivors wrapped in silver blankets sat huddled beneath the floodlights, looking like ghosts pulled from the lake. I completed the final incident form with hands that still trembled from cold and adrenaline. A petty officer thanked me. I nodded, already half gone in my head, and walked toward the parking lot. The pre-dawn sky over Milwaukee was the color of old steel by the time I reached my apartment. The hallway was silent. I pushed my door open and stepped into the familiar emptiness. One couch, one table, my uniform jacket draped over a chair, the framed photo of my father on the shelf. Nothing more. Nothing I would miss if orders sent me somewhere new tomorrow. I set down my gear bag and sat on the couch without removing my boots. My pulse still beat to the rhythm of the storm, the static of the radio, the desperate voice of the civilian captain. The 14 seconds I had to choose between the standard route or the thin gap opening between two dark shapes of ice. The moment my instinct in training aligned and said, "Turn." My phone buzzed on the table, a long string of messages from my mother. "Lila's engaged. Party in Charleston in 2 weeks. Everyone will be here." Another followed. "Wear something soft, no uniform. It gives people the wrong impression." Then, "Please do not talk about storms or rescues. This night is for Lila. She should shine." And the last one. "Try not to go silent when people talk to you. It makes guests uneasy." I let the phone dim. The room hummed with the brittle quiet that always came after missions. I looked at the photo of my father, dark hair, a smile in his eyes. He had been a harbor worker in Charleston, a man who knew knots and tides and weather better than most people knew themselves. He smelled like diesel and salt in sun. He went out on a storm call off Cape Fear and never returned. After that night, my mother refused to look at the ocean again. When I told her I was applying to the Coast Guard Academy, she said, "You want to break me." I said, "I want to save people the way they tried to save him." We did not talk for days after that. My phone buzzed again, this time Miguel. "Heads up. District pulled your vector report for review. Could be nothing, could be something. Keep your phone close." I stared at the screen until the cold prickled the back of my neck. A review could be routine, or it could be someone with a grudge or agenda, looking for an opening. I typed one word, "Copy." Then stood and walked to the bathroom. The hot shower hit my skin and washed away the sting of the lake, but not the heaviness working its way into my chest. When I stepped out, steam filled the room. I dressed in simple travel clothes and packed my suitcase with Charleston-appropriate outfits. Soft fabrics, neutral colors. Something that would not upset the carefully balanced world my mother had built. My uniform stayed in the closet. At the airport, the terminal buzzed with winter travelers. I boarded early, found a window seat, and drifted into a half sleep that felt more like a short blackout. When I woke, the plane was descending. Charleston sprawled beneath us, all marshland, water ribbons, and pale sunlight. The warm coastal air hit me like a different world. I breathed it in, thick and familiar. The mountains of pine and oak, the soft smell of pluff mud, the ghosts of my childhood. The driver talked the whole way into the city. I didn't mind. I just watched the familiar streets slide past. The pastel houses, the porches, the old iron balconies. My mother's house stood on a quiet street lined with live oaks heavy with moss. The white columns, the clean steps, the flowers arranged into perfect symmetry. Nothing out of place. I pulled my suitcase up the walkway. Through the door, I heard laughter, footsteps, the low hum of music, voices I had known all my life. I placed my hand on the polished handle and hesitated. The last time I had stood on this porch, I was leaving for the academy, uniform folded in my duffel, my mother standing in the doorway, trying to look supportive and failing. The phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message from Miguel. Review moving faster. Council involved. Something is off. Be ready. I exhaled slowly, slid the phone back into my pocket. Then I opened the door. Warm air rushed out to meet me, along with the scent of rosemary and lemon. I stepped inside. The hallway gleamed. Guests moved through the rooms like pieces on a well-arranged board. Soft classical music drifted from the speakers. No one noticed me at first. Then, Evelyn Quinn stepped out of the dining room holding folded napkins. Her face lit up in a practiced smile she had perfected over years of hosting. Marina, you made it! Thank goodness! Try to look rested. We are doing final touches. She touched my arm, guiding me inside. Leave your suitcase there. Lila is upstairs with the planner. Go make sure she is calm. I nodded and slipped out of my boots. The air smelled of flowers and something baking. I climbed the stairs. The laughter grew louder. In the room that used to be mine, Lila stood in front of a mirror while someone pinned pieces of her blonde hair. She looked stunning, effortless. Charleston's favorite kind of beauty. She saw me and her face lit. You are here! Thank God, I need you. She hugged me lightly, then stepped back and adjusted her dress. Please remember, keep everything light. Adrian gets tense when things get too serious. Just talk about safe things. I nodded. Later, I moved through the house like a shadow. People greeted me with polite warmth, then subtly shifted conversations away from anything that smelled like danger or storms. My mother hovered nearby, ensuring my presence did not interrupt the flow of her event. A neighbor laughed softly when she saw me. So you are the one who works on those big icy boats up north. Must be something. I get anxious just watching hurricane coverage. I smiled. It's work. I like it. She nodded, eyes scanning me the way people scan artifacts they can't quite categorize. Dinner began with polished silverware and conversations that floated above anything real. Then, Adrian arrived. The air changed. He walked into the room with the quiet confidence of a man trained to control space just by standing in it. Lila beamed. My mother practically glowed. He greeted each guest with ease, shaking hands, accepting compliments. He joined the dinner table near the center. People leaned in when he talked. Eventually, someone asked him about his time in the Navy. He smiled, sat back, and launched into a story about a Great Lakes rescue scenario the SEALs used in training. He described the storm, the ice, the last-second course change. He said, "The commanding officer held to guidance and changed to 315. Pure instinct, saved everyone." I set down my fork. The table quieted. I said, "It was 298. He glanced at me. "That's not what the modules say." I answered, "I know. I gave the 298 call." A silence fell over the table, the kind that pulls the air out of a room. Then, from the far end of the table, a man arose from his chair, older, silver at the temples, his posture sharp, even out of uniform. He said, "Captain Marina Quinn." The words landed like a flare, lighting up the night. Adrian stood up straight. His body shifted instantly into military discipline. He faced me. "Captain." He raised his hand in a crisp salute. The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a spoon. My mother's face went white. Lila's eyes widened, shock, and something wounded rising behind them. I stood and returned the salute. The air shifted entirely. The guests who had smiled politely earlier suddenly saw me not as a supporting character, but as the center of a story they had never asked about. People murmured apologies, soft, awkward, scrambling to reposition themselves. Under the table, my phone buzzed. A message from Miguel. "Review escalated. Council wants you in Chicago. Something is wrong. Go now." Lila leaned toward me, her voice shaking. "You made this night about you." I kept my voice even. I corrected a number. Adrian chose the rest. My mother whispered sharply, "You embarrassed us. You cannot keep pulling attention like this." I breathed once. Then I stood, walked out for the hallway, and stepped into the cool Charleston night. The lanterns flickered against the dark. My car waited under the oak trees. I tightened my grip on the wheel and drove north into the long stretch of highway, the sound of asphalt rising beneath my tires like the only answer I needed. Chapter 2. The Engagement Party. Pretty words with sharp edges. Warm, well-curated air wrapped around me the moment I stepped back inside the house. The sound of music flowed through the rooms like something poured deliberately, smooth and controlled. Laughter drifted around corners, floating above the polished surfaces and pristine decorations my mother had arranged with military precision. Every detail glowed with intention. My mother appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of glasses, her posture straight, her expression perfectly composed. She glanced at me, and her smile tightened. "Marina, try to blend in a bit more. We want people relaxed tonight." I nodded, letting her pass, and moved toward the living room. A group of guests stood near the fireplace, admiring a floral arrangement like it held answers to something meaningful. The jazz trio in the corner played softly, just enough to fill the silence between polite phrases. A woman in pearls placed a hand lightly on my arm as I passed. "So you are Evelyn's daughter, the one who works on those ships up north?" I nodded once. She gave me a delicate smile. "It must be so exciting, but goodness, I could never live like that. All that danger." I did not correct her misconception. That excitement had nothing to do with it. I said, "It is demanding, but the work matters." Her expression flickered. She expected something lighter, something easier to digest. She excused herself and drifted away. I moved further into the room, trying not to disturb the fragile balance of the atmosphere. The hum of conversation felt staged, a performance meant to uphold Charleston's version of grace. At the far end of the room, Leela stood with a circle of friends. She looked almost unreal in the soft lighting, her dress catching every glimmer of gold from the chandeliers. She laughed at something someone said, but when her eyes met mine, her expression faltered for a heartbeat. She walked toward me quickly, the smile returning to her face a moment too late. "There you are. People want to meet you later. Adrian's parents especially. Just be gentle, okay? Nothing heavy. Tonight is not the night for storms." Her tone held a careful edge, the same edge I remembered from years of childhood competitions. She squeezed my arm once and rejoined her group. I walked toward the dining room, where guests were settling into seats. The long table stretched under a chandelier, the plates arranged with knife-edge precision. Servers moved like shadows, quiet and smooth. I took a seat toward the middle, close enough to join conversations if needed, but far enough to avoid becoming the center of them. Adrian arrived moments later. His presence recalibrated the room instantly. People straightened when he walked past. He greeted each guest with measured charm, confidence radiating from him like second nature. He kissed Leela lightly on the temple before she guided him toward his seat. Across the table, a man leaned toward him eagerly. "Tell us about your work before med school, the Navy part." He smiled, settling comfortably into the attention. He began describing his time training with SEAL teams, the cold water drills, the simulated operations, the emphasis on precision. The table leaned forward collectively, drawn to danger at a safe distance. Then he shifted into a story I recognized before he even finished the first sentence. A training scenario modeled after a real Great Lakes rescue. He said, "There was this case where the commanding officer held steady until instinct told him to switch to a 315 heading. It saved an entire civilian boat. They teach us that one for a reason. Perfect judgment." My pulse stilled. Instinct? 315? A sanitized myth. I set down my fork. I said, "The heading was 298. He looked at me, confusion touching his expression. The rest of the table went quieter, sensing a disruption. He said, "That is not what the training module says." I said, "I know. I was there. I issued the 298. A small ripple went through the guests. A woman's hand paused in mid-gesture. Someone's breath brought audibly. Leela's spine straightened, her fingers tightening around her napkin. My mother's hands covered her mouth. I rose slowly and returned the salute. The motion felt quiet and heavy, filling the room in a way no raised voice ever could. Whispers erupted as soon as my hand lowered. Guests leaned toward each other, suddenly aware of a story beneath the surface they had ignored all evening. People who had dismissed my work earlier searched for words to make up for it. Someone murmured, "I had no idea." Another said, "What an extraordinary woman." Someone else said, "Imagine carrying that responsibility." None of it mattered. Not the sudden admiration, not the attempts to correct old assumptions. They were reacting to a display, not a truth. Adrian sat down again, but his expression was different. Respect mixed with confusion, and something else, something uncomfortable. He looked at me like he was seeing someone entirely new, someone he did not expect to exist in the same world as Charleston brunches and polished smiles. I felt this shift ripple across the table. Leela's hands were trembling. Her eyes darted between Adrian, the Admiral, and me, as if trying to find her place inside a moment she hadn't rehearsed. My mother leaned in next to me, her voice cutting through the murmurs in a tight whisper. "Marina, did you have to do that?" I kept my eyes forward. I did nothing except answer. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. The vibration was sharp, insistent. I slid it out quietly. A message from Miguel. Council moved the review ahead. They want you in Chicago immediately. Something is wrong. Do not wait. The words tightened my chest. The noise in the room felt too loud suddenly, too bright. Leela tugged gently at my sleeve. Her voice shook with anger and disbelief. You made this night about you. This was supposed to be mine. I kept my voice straight. I did not ask for this moment. She whispered, You stole the attention. You always do. I never get to be enough when you are in the room. The hurt in her eyes cut deeper than the words. There was fear there too, and something fragile beneath it. My mother leaned in next. You embarrassed us. I asked you one thing, one simple thing. Do not overshadow your sister. I felt every heartbeat in my throat. I said, I corrected a number. That's all. Leila stared at me as if searching for something she couldn't name. You should go, she said. For a moment, I felt the sting behind my ribs, sharp and familiar. The old ache of trying to fit into a room built for someone else. I stood up. Thank you for dinner. No one stopped me as I stepped away from the table. My footsteps felt too loud on the hardwood floor. The air inside the house pressed against my skin like something heavy. I walked out the front door and into the cool Charleston night. Lantern light flickered softly against the dark. The live oaks swayed with the breeze, branches moving like slow shadows. My car waited under the moss-covered canopy. I opened the door, sat down, and gripped the steering wheel. Behind me, the house glowed with warm light and muffled music, a world I had never fully belonged to, no matter how hard I tried. Ahead of me stretched a long, dark road leading north, toward Chicago, toward questions and consequences, and the truth of what had happened on the lake. I turned the key. The engine hummed, and I drove into the night, the highway unfolding under the headlights like a path I already knew by heart. Chapter 3. The Salute That Shattered the Room. The highway stretched ahead like a narrow ribbon of light carved into the darkness. The deeper the night grew, the louder the thoughts in my head became. The dinner table replayed itself over and over. Adrian's salute, the shock in the room, the crack in Lila's voice when she said I ruined her night, the disappointment in my mother's eyes, sharp as broken glass. Wind pushed against the car as I crossed state lines. The road signs changed. The temperature dropped. I rolled the window down for a moment, letting cold air slap me awake. It smelled like asphalt, winter, and distance. Hours passed. The sky stayed black. Somewhere near the Ohio border, fatigue hit me like a weight dropped onto my shoulders. My eyes blurred. The painted lines on the asphalt flickered. I pulled off at an exit with a single gas station lit by flickering neon. The air outside bit into my skin. Inside, the store hums with the sound of old fluorescent lights. A bored cashier leaned against the counter, watching a muted television mounted in the corner. A coffee machine sputtered weakly beside him. I headed straight for the restroom, pushed open the heavy door, and locked myself into the last stall. The smell of harsh cleaning supplies burned my nose. I unzipped my bag and laid my uniform carefully across the metal shelf. The fabric felt cold under my hands, familiar and grounding in a way nothing else had since the storm. I changed slowly. Shirt, blouse, collar, jacket, boots laced tight. When I finished, I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the one who had been at an engagement dinner hours earlier. This version of me was sharper, steadier, ready. My phone vibrated against the sink. I answered quietly. "What else did you find?" Miguel's voice came through tired and tense. "AIS data from last night. The primary file has a timestamp. The district copy does not. Someone removed it." Cold crawled up my spine. "Who touched the district file?" He hesitated. "Someone with higher access. And Rourke has been digging. He has opinions about you. Old ones." I asked, "Do I need a lawyer?" He answered, "Not yet. Just be ready. Legal wants you in Chicago as soon as possible." Then he added, softer, "And Marina, you made the right call. Do not let them shake that." I hung up and stared at my reflection again. I breathed once, twice, then grabbed my bag and walked back into the night. The sun had just started to bleed faint color into the sky when Chicago's skyline rose ahead of me. Gray buildings, flat light, snow along the shoulders of the road. My body ached with exhaustion, but the uniform kept me upright. The federal building's entrance was a revolving door of security and tired-looking employees carrying folders. I went through screening, signed my name, and headed to the 10th floor. A petty officer behind a desk straightened when he saw my rank. "Captain Quinn, Lieutenant Harper is waiting in conference room 3. I nodded and walked down the hallway. The air inside felt cold in a different way. Bureaucratic, dehydrated, rooms full of judgment. Inside conference room 3, Harper sat at a long table. She looked composed, professional, unreadable. Behind her were thick binders, a pitcher of water, and a screen already powered on. She did not waste time. "Captain, have a seat. Let us go through the sequence again." I sat. My hands rested on the table, palms steady. "She asked for the Mayday." I told her. "She asked about the drift projection." I told her. "She asked about the ice ridge." I told her. "She asked when I issued the 298 vector." I gave her the timestamp without hesitation. She reviewed my logs, then the district copy. Her brow tightened at the missing timestamp. She tapped the page lightly. "This discrepancy is the primary problem." I said, "I sent a complete file." She asked, "Any idea why this version does not match?" I answered, "No. Someone altered it after it left my hands." She nodded once, as if she had expected that answer. Then she asked, "Did anyone suggest presenting the decision differently?" "No." "Did anyone pressure you to conform to guidance over judgment?" "No." Before she could ask another question, the door opened. Commander Rourke entered, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. He carried a folder under one arm like it was a weapon. Harper said, "Commander, we have begun." Rourke sat without being asked, his eyes fixed on me, sharp and cold. He said, "The district has concerns about officers under your command adopting reckless deviations from established doctrine. Leadership must set firm expectations." I answered evenly, "Doctrine allows for deviation when conditions change." He said, "You gambled too freely." I kept my voice level. I assessed data in real time and made a call that saved lives. Rourke leaned back, narrowing his eyes. "Your record shows a pattern of independent decision-making. Some might call that admirable.
I call it dangerous. There it was, his motive. He saw flexible judgments as chaos. He saw officers like me as threats to his tidy chain of command. Harper lifted her hand, forcing us both into silence. Commander, we are here to determine facts, not philosophies. She turned to the door. We will hear from Ensign Brooks. The young officer stepped inside, shoulders tight, eyes flicking nervously between us. He looked smaller than he had on the bridge that night. He held a piece of paper, but did not look at it. Harper said, Ensign, describe what occurred after the mission. Brooks swallowed. I was called to district. I was told the report needed to reflect discipline. I was asked to sign a version that said the vector change was optional and less urgent. That is not what happened. It was urgent. We had seconds. Rourke's voice cut sharply. You misunderstood the conversation. Young officers often confuse clarification for pressure. Brooks lifted his head for the first time, his voice trembling but louder. I know the difference, sir. Harper's face changed slightly. Something like resolution passed through her eyes. She clicked the remote. The wall screen lit up with the cabin video from the civilian boat. The tight space, the choked fear, the sound of the ice hitting the hull. Then my own voice cut through the static. 298, turn now, turn now. We watched the ridge slide past their window. Someone sobbed in the background. The timestamp sat right in the corner of the frame. Harper paused the video. This matches the primary log. She looked at Rourke. Commander, the altered district file originated from your office. Audit logs show your workstation accessed the document before the timestamp vanished. Rourke's jaw tensed. His voice sharpened. I acted to protect the district. Public narratives can spiral. Allowing highly flexible decisions to be framed as standard encourages expectations we cannot sustain. I removed nothing essential. I ensured clarity. Harper's voice stayed calm and deadly. You adjusted evidence to fit a narrative you preferred. No answer came from him this time. She closed her folder. Given the testimony, the original data, the NOAA timestamps, and the survivor footage, this board finds that Captain Marina Quinn acted correctly under extreme conditions. Her judgment was sound. She is cleared of all wrongdoing. A weight loosened in my chest. The air tasted different for the first time in days. Harper continued. This board also recommends immediate suspension of Commander Rourke pending a full investigation into his handling of district records. The silence that followed was heavy and final. Rourke rose slowly, anger tight inside every muscle, and left the room without a word. Brooks let out a shaking breath. I'm sorry,
Ma'am, he said softly. I should have spoken sooner. You did now, I said. That matters. When I stepped outside, snow began falling, thin flakes drifting in the cold wind. The city noise hummed below like a distant tide. I closed my eyes and breathed, the weight on my shoulders lifting piece by piece, falling away like frost. A flight to Charleston waited. Conversations waited. Apologies and truths and years of buried fear waited. But for that moment, standing under the quiet snowfall, there was only relief. Relief and the faint, steady pull of home. Chapter 4. The Investigation. When the system turns on the quiet ones. The night after the preliminary questioning passed in fragments, I slept in a hotel near the Chicago District building, the kind of place that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old carpet. Every time I drifted off, I heard radar pings in my dreams or the crunch of ice sliding past the hull. When morning came, I felt more awake in my uniform than I ever could out of it. Snow dusted the sidewalks as I walked toward the building. The wind off Lake Michigan cut sideways, needling straight through my coat. People hurried past with heads tucked low. Inside, the lobby hummed with tired employees, carrying coffee and stacks of folders. I presented my ID again, went through security, and rode the elevator up to the 10th floor. The air felt colder today, as if the building itself knew what kind of morning it was preparing for. When I entered the conference suite, the long table had been rearranged. More chairs. A recording camera positioned at the head. Files stacked in neat rows. Several officers were already inside, speaking in low tones. Their voices stopped when they saw me. One of them nodded respectfully. "Captain Quinn?" I returned the nod, then spotted Harper near the window. She stood straight, calm, flipping through documents with quiet precision. Something in her posture told me that she had already made up her mind about the direction this morning would take. She motioned to the seat across from her. "Captain, thank you for coming." I sat. She closed the folder in front of her. "We will resume. The full review board is present." Her tone was controlled and steady, neither hostile nor friendly. Exactly what I expected from someone who had probably interrogated more officers than she cared to count. The door opened. Ensign Brooks stepped inside. His uniform was pressed, but his face looked drawn, as if he had not truly slept since the night of the storm. He seated himself at the far end, eyes dropping immediately. Moments later, Commander Rourke walked in. The air shifted. He carried himself with the rigid certainty of a man who believed the system existed to protect him. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable except for the faint flicker of irritation when he saw me already seated. He sat beside Harper, setting his folder down with careful, deliberate movements. Harper began. "We will resume from the record discrepancies." I straightened my chair as she displayed the 2 AIS files again on the screen. The primary file with the timestamp on the vector change. The district copy with a blank space where that timestamp should have been. Harper said, "Captain, confirm again that this timestamp was included in your original submission." "Yes." She nodded, then turned her attention. "Commander, can you explain why the district copy does not contain it?" Rourke exhaled slowly, as though he were being forced into tedium. "Our administrative team manages formatting. It is possible this detail was lost in transfer." Harper answered, "Audit logs show the file was accessed from your office prior to the missing timestamp." His eyes narrowed. "I review many documents. That does not imply misconduct." Something inside me tightened. Not anger, recognition. This was not a man who made mistakes. This was a man who controlled narratives. Harper's tone sharpened slightly. "We will hear from Ensign Brooks." Brooks stood. His shoulders shook once before he steadied them. "I was called to the district office," he said. "I was told the report needed to reflect discipline, that the record should show the decision was optional, that the urgency was overstated." Rourke cut in. "You misunderstood. I told you that the district cannot afford officers improvising beyond doctrine." Brooks lifted his eyes from the table. "Sir, you told me it would be better for everyone if the report highlighted guidance rather than urgency. It felt like pressure." Harper continued. "Did you feel encouraged to sign an altered summary?" Brooks swallowed hard. "Yes." A murmur rippled at the far end of the table. Someone shifted uncomfortably. The air thickened, the kind of tension that comes from hearing someone speak a truth that everyone else hoped would remain unspoken. Harper clicked the remote. The screen changed. The video played again. The survivors. The shaking cabin.
the ice slamming against the hull. Then the sound of my voice through static, calling the new heading. The exact moment the civilian boat turned and missed the ridge. Harper paused the video at the embedded timestamp. She said, "This aligns precisely with Captain Quinn's bridge log. There is no deviation." Silent consensus moved through the room. Then Harper looked at Rourke. "Commander, do you have anything further to clarify?" Rourke leaned forward, voice lowering with forced calm. "Operational flexibility, when highlighted in public records, encourages unrealistic expectations. The public does not understand nuance. When officers see deviations praised, they learn the wrong lesson. I sought to protect the district by ensuring our records reflected stability." There it was, the core of him. He would rather falsify a file than admit doctrine had limits. Harper's face did not change. Protecting the district does not include altering evidence. She closed the folder in front of her and drew a slow breath before speaking. "Based on the logs, the NOAA data, the survivor testimony, and the statements presented, this board finds Captain Marina Quinn acted appropriately. Her decision was made under extreme conditions and directly contributed to preserving the lives of 27 civilians." Relief hit me like a wave I hadn't been bracing for. Harper continued, "Commander Rourke will be placed on immediate suspension pending an internal investigation into the handling of district records." Silence followed. Rourke's jaw clenched. His hand tightened around the edge of his folder, knuckles whitening. But he said nothing. He stood abruptly and left the room without looking at anyone. Brooks exhaled shakily. He said softly, "I am sorry, ma'am. I should have spoken sooner." I answered, "You spoke when it mattered." He nodded, eyes lowered again, then took his seat. Harper dismissed everyone. Chairs scraped against the floor as officers stood and filed out. I stayed in my seat for another moment, letting the rush of relief move through me with each breath. The tension I had carried for days began to unravel. When I stepped outside, snow was drifting sideways through the cold air. The world felt washed clean, muted. The downtown noise sounded distant and small. I walked slowly, breathing the sharp winter air and letting the cold settle into my lungs. I called home later from the hotel. The line clicked twice before my mother answered, her voice brittle. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She released a fragile breath. "Good." "Leela has been worried. She did not say much after last night." I closed my eyes. "I will come home for a day before I head back north." Silence. Then, "I would like that." The next morning, I boarded a flight back to Charleston. The coastal air felt warmer, heavier. When I stepped inside my mother's kitchen, she was standing near the sink with a dish towel in her hands, twisting it slowly. She said, "I saw the video. Hearing your voice, hearing what was happening, it felt like losing your father all over again. I only wanted to keep you safe. I did not know how else to do it." Her voice cracked. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired in ways I had never truly seen. I said, "I cannot promise calm seas, but keeping me away from the water does not keep me alive. It only keeps me further from myself." Her shoulders loosened. She nodded quietly. Later, Leela arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. She hesitated before handing one to me. She said, "I have always felt like I was being compared to you, even when no one said it out loud. When Adrian saluted you, I felt like I disappeared. I felt like I could never measure up." I let her speak. She said, "I'm sorry. I should not have said what I said last night. You did not steal anything." I said, "I never wanted to outshine you. I only wanted space to be myself. She let out a small laugh, half breath, half relief. Maybe we can both have that space without pushing each other out. We sat together on the back steps as the winter light fell across the yard. It felt fragile and new, like something we were building from the ground up. 2 days later, I flew back to Milwaukee. The lake greeted me with quiet gray water and drifting ice plates that tapped gently against each other.
Met me at the pier, handing me a hot coffee. He said, "District suspended Rourke. Full investigation underway. You are clear." I looked out over the lake. The horizon stretched wide and cold and honest. For the first time in months, maybe years, the tightness in my chest eased completely. I finally let myself breathe. Chapter 5. Justice, Family, and Finding North Again. The morning of the final hearing felt like standing in the stillness before wind hits open water. I awoke before my alarm, dressed in my uniform carefully, and walked toward the federal building, with the cold biting into the skin around my collar. Chicago's winter sky hung low and heavy, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. There was no room left for fear, only facts. Inside the conference room, the tables had been rearranged again. More chairs, more paperwork. A camera pointed at the center seats. Officers filed in with stiff expressions, each carrying the weight of their role. Harper stood at the head of the table, calm, precise, every movement controlled. She nodded softly toward me. "Take your seat, Captain." I sat, setting my folder neatly in front of me. The room filled slowly. The district representative, legal staff, Brooks, pale but standing straighter than yesterday, and finally Rourke, whose entrance felt like cold air slipping beneath a closed door. He took a seat with deliberate force, placing his folder down as if to anchor himself. Harper began. "We will proceed." The video testimony screen flickered to life. A woman appeared in a small cabin interior, bundled in a coat, hands clasped tightly. Her name was Jenna Carter, a survivor from the civilian vessel. Her voice carried a thin tremor, but held steady. She described the freezing cabin, the chaos inside, how she recorded it for her family because she genuinely believed they might not survive. Her face tightened when she described hearing the ice grind along the hull. Then Harper played the video. My voice filled the room, crackling through static. 298, turn now, turn now. The ice ridge slid past their window, close enough to blot out light. Someone in the cabin cried with relief. The timestamp glowed in the corner. When the video ended, silence settled like cold settling over still water. Harper let the quiet linger, then spoke. "The timestamp on this video matches the primary AIS file and the bridge log exactly." Her eyes shifted toward Rourke. The discrepancy in the district copy remains unexplained. Rourke leaned forward, his tone tight but controlled. "This only shows what the civilians experienced. It does not prove that deviation from doctrine should be validated. Officers must maintain consistency. Flexibility is dangerous." Harper's expression remained neutral, but her voice sharpened. "Flexibility is built into doctrine when conditions change. That is why judgment is entrusted to officers on scene." She turned toward Brooks. "Ensign, step forward." Brooks stood. His hand shook, but his voice had more strength than before. "I was asked to sign a version of the report that minimized the urgency.
I was told it would protect the district from fallout. I believed I was being guided to support a narrative, not the truth. Work cut in quickly. You were told to emphasize discipline, nothing more. Brooks shook his head slightly. That is not how it felt, sir. Harper tapped the document gently. Ensign Brooks's statement, the primary AIS file, the NOOA buoy timestamp, and the survivor footage all align with Captain Quinn's account. She lifted another page. Audit logs show the district file was accessed and saved from your workstation, Commander. Work's jaw tightened. I acted to protect operational integrity. If the public begins to expect exceptional judgment in every case, they will panic when less experienced officers cannot match it. I shaped the record to reflect stability. Harper's voice hardened. Accuracy is not optional. Neither is integrity. She closed the folder. This board concludes that Captain Marina Quinn acted with sound judgment under extreme conditions. Her decision was necessary and life-saving. She is fully cleared. Relief washed through my chest like a tide finally reaching shore. Then Harper turned her attention again. Furthermore, Commander Work is suspended from operational duties pending investigation into falsification and improper handling of district records. A quiet murmur moved around the room. Work stiffened, his mouth tightening into a narrow line. Without a word, he gathered his folder and walked out, the door closing behind him with a loud, final thud. Brooks approached afterward. He said, "I am sorry, ma'am. Truly." I answered, "You helped. That is what matters." When I stepped outside, the Chicago air felt different from the day before. The wind was softer, the sky less gray, not cleansed, but calmer. A wide quiet that did not feel empty. I closed my eyes and let the cold settle around me. For the first time since the storm, my shoulders loosened fully. 2 days later, I flew back to Charleston. The airport was humid, smelling faintly of ocean air and pine. When I walked into my mother's house, she was standing at the counter holding a dish towel like she didn't know what to do with her hands. She looked at me, and I saw fear, exhaustion, and something like relief pass across her face. She spoke first. "I watched the video. Hearing your voice in that moment, it felt like the night your father didn't come home. I carried that fear for so long, I forgot it was fear. I thought if I kept you away from it, I could keep you alive." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I stepped closer, letting her words settle. I said, "I cannot promise you calm water, but hiding from the ocean doesn't make it less real, and it doesn't keep me safe." Her shoulders trembled once. Then she nodded, not dramatically, but with something quiet and honest. Later that afternoon, Leela arrived with 2 coffees in hand. She walked onto the back porch and sat beside me on the steps. She stared at the yard for a long time before speaking. "I felt invisible when Adrian saluted you." Her voice was soft but unsteady. She said, "Everyone was looking at you like you were someone extraordinary. And I realized maybe you always have been. I was jealous, not because of your career, but because you stood so firmly in who you are, even when no one in this family knew how to handle it." She wiped under her eyes. "I'm sorry. I did not want to push you out. I just didn't know how to stand next to you without feeling small. I told her quietly, I never wanted your light dimmed. I only wanted room for mine. She breathed out slowly. Then maybe we can both have space, real space, not stolen from each other. The afternoon light fell warm and golden over the yard. For the first time in years, we sat together without feeling like we were competing for something unnamed. 2 days later, I returned to Milwaukee. Snow drifted along the sidewalks, and the lake lay quiet under a wide gray sky. I met Miguel near the pier. He handed me a steaming cup of coffee and smiled tiredly. District suspended work. Full review underway. You're clear. I nodded, holding the warm cup between my hands. The lake stretched out before me, calm and wide, breathing in slow, steady notions. The faint sound of ice plates knocking along the shoreline echoed softly, like distant footsteps. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold wind brush against my face. For most of my life, I had been chasing some version of validation, a nod from my mother, approval from strangers, a place in rooms that weren't built for me. But standing there with the lake in front of me and the weight gone from my shoulders, I felt something shift for good. I knew who I was. I knew what I had done when the ice closed in. I didn't need anyone's permission to stand in it. I sipped the coffee, tasted the bitterness and the warmth, and felt more grounded than I had in years. If you have ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or convinced that your strength did not count, tell me about the moment you rose anyway.